Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Niomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. Today, I am doing a recap on my interview with Bashir Riachi. Bash and I went to high school together and with good old Bunbury High. And you might have heard a reference of me speaking about a trauma from the hill. Because anyone that's been to Bunbury High knows to get there, unless you're driving by car, you've got to walk up a pretty big hill. But it was a great school and it was great people that I had in my year, and Bash was one of them. So I did see some comments that he put on LinkedIn and some of the things that he was doing, and it really felt fitting to have him on as a guest. So I really feel quite grateful that when I reached out, he said yes. Yay. And it was really good to reconnect with him. And some of the things that he shared, some of those gold nuggets were just amazing for me. And after the interview, I'll just start with this. After the interview, we continued talking, and one of the things that didn't come through in the podcast episode, but was really pivotal that I wanted to share, was around how we show up. And Bash and I were talking about the work that's done behind the scenes, right? It's how all of our habits and all of the practices that we have in private are how then we reflect and how we show up in the public space. So it's the work we do in the background. It's the work we do on ourselves. It's the way that we serve others. It's the silent things that we do that no one else sees that helps us become who we need to be when we're showing up and when we're serving in that space. So one of the things that we did touch on as well, Bash and I, was bias. And bias is something that I'm really quite passionate about because it happens at the subconscious level, right? So we're not always aware of some of the ways or whys behind the thinking that we have, the thoughts, the actions, the emotions, right? And they're driven from an internal space. And Bash spoke about coming from a Lebanese background and coming into Australia and how he stood out because he was different and how people treated him different, and how they made assumptions about him being Italian, even in one of the examples that he gave, that, you laugh it off at the time, but when you're experiencing that bias, it can be sometimes a little disheartening. Now, Bash was really lucky that he had an amazing mum that supported him through that and gave him that strength to know and recognize that the things that are different within him are the things that make him awesome. Right? The way he shows up in the world that is different to all of those blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, as Bash put it, and the fact that he couldn't speak English, but he could speak, 2 other languages, showed that he had something extra to bring to those relationships. And that's a really important thing in leadership, is if you are a little bit different and if you come from left field, that can be your superpower, right? You don't have to always suppress that authenticity within you because of being worried that you will stand out or you will be different, because sometimes that's what people are looking for. And, I know with myself, I'm quite unique, and I have a whole range of, services in the private space that I do that are a little bit left field, right? That go into a different space. But the way that I show up consistently and the work that I do in myself means that I can come across really authentic in both that private setting and that spiritual setting, and also in the corporate space as well, delivering the messages that I deliver, bringing energy in to leadership courses and all of those sorts of things. So bias as well, for me personally, I've experienced was mainly around my gender. And when I deliver to corporate spaces around bias, I'm very open at saying that, a gender bias isn't a male issue. It's not that we need to change the way males behave and males think, because there's females out there that have gender bias. And the way that I was raised and, the corporate roles that I had were in male dominated industries. And when I've done some reflection and done, it's called an IAT, an implicit association test, it actually brought up that I even have some of those biases. So when we're looking at biases in our life or in the workplace, we can't then specify there's one particular element that's contributing to that. So it's not just men contributing to a gender bias, it's a people issue. When you're looking at cultures, it's not just the dominant or the majority culture that's contributing to a cultural bias in your organization. It's a people issue, right? It's about all of the people coming together and recognizing what they're saying, how they're feeling, how they're behaving, and how that is coming from that internal subconscious or implicit bias. So I really love that Bash touched on that, because it's something that we don't always raise and talk about very openly, because it's really confronting to think that we might have a bias against someone or something, particularly because of the way that they actually present, or their background, or their gender, or their color, or their shape, but it's there. And I loved how he touched on that and brought awareness to that. One of the other things that he spoke about was connecting with people and that art of listening, of understanding them and understanding what motivates them, what makes them tick, why they behave and think the way they do. And this really resonated with me, because this is probably a really strong foundation of the online leadership program, the ripple effect that I actually have, because it's around understanding people. And Stephen Covey even says in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People that you need to seek first to understand before being understood. And that doesn't mean just going out and having beers with someone and getting to know them on a personal level. What that means is understanding what's going on within them. What subconscious stuff do they have going on? Why do they react to that particular situation and not this one? Why are they driven to do what they do from their own previous experiences, from their own learnings that they've had, and understanding how they tick, because that's when we can actually come from a place as a leader and serve them in the best way possible, motivate them, inspire them, and do all those sorts of things. And Bash did say a key area of that is the art of listening, is sitting back and listening and observing and really taking in all of that from your members of your team. Another thing he touched on, which was a personal story, but I saw a leadership connection, was when we're making decisions in the workplace. And a lot of the decisions that we make without realizing sometimes come from a self-serving nature. So sometimes we know what the right decision to make is, but we go with what's going to make us feel the best. We don't want to feel uncomfortable, so we won't have those conversations. Or, if your business, and we've probably seen a lot of this, has possibly been struggling through all of the changes and the rising costs and things like that. It's knowing when to downscale, having to let people go, having to have those conversations with people. It's about doing things that are right, rather than doing things that make you feel better. And as a leader, we're put into this situation all the time. Now, which one you choose is completely up to you, but reviewing the situation and actually sitting there and going, to do that, it feels icky because I have to come out of my comfort zone. To have that conversation with that person about their behavior or about that incident last week. I'll do it tomorrow. Right. No. If we're going to serve our people, we need to come from that place of doing what is the right thing and making those decisions. And he inferred that and gave that example through when he was speaking about his dad, and putting his dad in an aged care facility. Culturally, there's an expectation that the family look after people in the aging members of their family, not put them in an aged care facility. Yet if they had done that because that would have made them feel better, then their dad would have missed out on all of the elements that an aged care facility can provide. And they're set up for the well-being of people, right? And like Bash said, there's physios, and there's probably, I think there's a lot of social connection and all of those things that fit within the positive psychology model and possibly even the PERMA model are actively embedded into systems that are set up for well-being. And he would have missed out on that. And so by making the decision they knew was the right one, even though it really didn't feel right at the time because it wasn't serving what they thought they should be doing or what would made them feel better, ended up being the best outcome for everyone. And I really loved that share.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Niomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Niomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgrowconsulting.com.au.
Bash also spoke about, connecting with other people and using other people to propel yourself. He spoke about the late Michael Coote, who I had a lot of time for, was a wonderful human, and how he was so inspiring to Bash, leading and paving the way for Bash to go through. And I may have frequented a few of the pubs that those boys were involved in. But, and they were always great environments. They really did a lot of work in the background to be able to show up in the way that they did. And, he also spoke about that later on with another leader that he had, asking that leader, how do you do what you do? Share that with me. And the key thing that the gold nugget that he was given from that moment was be you and do what you stand for. And that was magic to me. And, Bash talked about sitting down and writing what are the things that he stands for? What are the core elements that connect with him? And then how can he show up in that space for everyone else and for himself ultimately? What we put out into the world, into the universe, into our workplaces, into our relationships does come back. It may not come back straight away, but whatever energy we're putting into something is reciprocated. And with laws of energy, they say by 5, right? So if you're putting out negative, then you're going to get negative by 5. But if you're putting out and you're coming from a place of wanting to give and wanting to meet your values and be authentic and all of those sorts of things, then that is what is going to flow back into you. And then it becomes a cycle, right? Because then that feeds you to be able to come through and serve again. So that was really awesome as well. We also talked about off camera after the interview, the tidal energy and the way that things work and comes in waves, right? And when we're in a space, it can seem like a tidal wave is coming. But if we can stand and have consistency and sit in that authentic place, that tidal wave will come over us. And each time a wave comes at us, it's going to have less and less power because of the way that we sit in that consistent space, because of the way that we show up in that authenticity and being authentic in the way that we do it, because of the way that we're standing there and showing what we stand for and being driven from what we stand for and what values we have, because we're making those decisions that need to be made, the right decisions for the right time, not what's just going to make me feel better. That gives us the strength to stand against those tidal waves, because we have, tapped into that art of listening, of being aware and having self-awareness. That's always also a major contributor. And we did talk about self-reflection a little bit in the interview, which was great. And one of the key elements that Bash shared was, we can sit in and look at things ourselves, but the most effective way that Bash has seen helps him with his self-reflection is through the feedback of others. Asking others what their opinions are, bringing in the art of listening and putting those together. Because sometimes when we are sitting in and we've got our own self-reflection going on, That can come from that place of bias that I was mentioning before. That can come from that place of, giving ourselves what we think we should be giving ourselves rather than what we really need. And if we have some really trusted colleagues and a really strong support network that aren't going to feed you what you want to hear, but feed you what you need to hear, that's a key component of helping with your self-reflection and helping with your growth. And, he went on to say as well, he doesn't sit there and think, oh, how can I be a better leader tomorrow? He actually just learns from the interactions that he has with others. He learns from the coaching that he does with other people. He learns from his years of teaching and how he can show up for those children and help them on their education journey, and how he can come in with those two key elements he spoke about at the start of the interview, showing up with an element of trust and accountability. And that was a really great way to start and introduce into the space, because I totally agree with him. Trust and accountability can incorporate a range of other leadership traits, in the way that we're performing as a leader. And trust is so pivotal, not only because that meets our own values when we're showing up in a way where people can trust us, when we have transparency, when we're open with our communication, when we're building effective relationships. But trust also allows people to sit in a space that's familiar. So the human brain loves what's familiar, doesn't quite feel safe around things that are unfamiliar, right? And that's through evolutionary programming in our brain. When we were living as tribal creatures, everything that was familiar was safe. Everything that was unfamiliar had the potential to eat or kill us, right? So we didn't have as many experiences as we do now. So the brain is, millions and millions of years old, and it still sits in that programming. So when we're coming from a place of trust, the people around us are familiar. They know how we're going to behave. They know how we're going to respond to situations and hopefully not react. They know where we're coming from and what our expectations are. And then that forms that element of trust. And when you have a team that trusts you, you're able to push those boundaries a little bit more, because people know that you're familiar. People know that you have their best interests at heart. And they're more open to taking those risks because they feel they're calculated risks because of that trust element. And then the other aspect of that was the accountability. And we did mention in the interview that a lot of people see accountability as something to avoid, right? They see it as being punished if they don't meet a deadline, and they see it as something that restricts them and keeps them confined. But accountability, especially in the entrepreneurial world, is gold. It's what we're all seeking. We set up and have accountability partners. I'm part of a mastermind where we get together fortnightly and we share our wins and our challenges, and we keep each other accountable if we say we're going to do something, right? Now, by saying you're going to do something and doing it and becoming accountable, then that just adds to that element of trust. So being accountable isn't about ruling with a stick, but being accountable is saying that I'm going to be accountable. Oh, sorry. That was a bit rushed there. I'm going to be accountable for my actions. And then I have that expectation of you doing the same thing. I trust that you will then also show up from that place of accountability. If I say I'm going to be at this meeting at this time, I'm going to be there, and maybe even earlier, as Bash said. If I say I'm going to deliver this report on this at this time, it's going to be delivered. If I say that I'm going to show up to you in a particular way, in a particular format, in a particular context, then that's what's going to happen. And when we have accountability within our teams, that can only lead to a team that trusts each other. Now, you don't have to like each other to be able to trust each other. But if you don't trust each other, that is going to impact your ability to like each other and work effectively together. So trust and accountability, we spoke about that a fair bit, and it really resonated with me, and hopefully it'll resonate with you as well. So Bash is now living in Melbourne, doing some great things in the corporate space. If you want to reach out with him, you can do so via LinkedIn or the email that he's given, and reach out and have a chat. right? He's a wealth of knowledge. He has so much experience and he loves to tell stories, just a bit like me. So reach out and connect with him. I'm sure he'd love to have a chat with you. So thank you very much for showing up to this episode. If you haven't listened to the interview with Bashir, I totally recommend. Yeah. I think I say this every time, every episode, but I do. I really do recommend you go back and listen to it because I had a heap of fun having a chat with him. And I know there will be at least one thing that connects, resonates for you, and gives you that beautiful gold nugget that you're looking for. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. And I look forward to serving you in our next episode. Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.